Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. Today I was alerted to an article that was published a couple of days ago in a publication called the Washington Spectator. This article is written by someone named Dave Troy, who says he's an investigative journalist, but I don't think that he really is. I think he's just pretending to be. He's calling himself that when he really isn't, because after reading this article, I didn't see any investigative journalism there whatsoever. I saw a crazy conspiracy theory and pretty much nothing else. There was really not a lot of factual information in there. Basically, what he does here, this article was put together to basically lump the entire UFO community into a box and call them violent extremists. Basically, that's what he's done here. Anyway, I want to talk about this article today because it angers me very much. Basically, it's totally false, some of the stuff that he states in here. Actually, Klaus, who's a personality that you'll see on Twitter X a lot, talks about UFOs all the time. He actually wrote yesterday, that Dave Troy article is the laziest piece of journalism I've seen in a long time, and the fact that it took him months to write it should tell you all you need to know. Yeah, I totally agree. It says he's an investigative journalist, but this guy's really not. And to say that basically the UFO community is basically a bunch of violent extremists who could help to end democracy. That was the gist of this article. I don't know what he's talking about, because for one thing, people in the UFO community, they despise violence. I mean, I talk about it on here all the time. I bemoan the fact that the human race is a bunch of, act like a bunch of wild, violent animals on a regular basis, and that we these visitors that are here, they must look at us and that's how they view us. I mean, that's what we talk about here. That's not, people don't want violence. People aren't talking about violence. I think what this guy's Dave Troy, he's confused frustration with violence, with calls for violence. That's what he's done. That's what he's doing here. Basically, what he did to make his to try to booster his case was he took some comments from Jeremy Corbell that took them out of context, and then used that as the impetus for his argument here, is that we're heading down this path toward where people in Congress are starting to listen to these violent, stupid maniacs out there who believe in UFOs, and they're taking it for gospel, and they're passing legislation. That's what he's talking about here. He goes here. He actually talked about the early on in his article. He says that he talks about the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act, that includes a provision that requires the federal government to provide any and all records on UAP to the National Archives, which in turn is supposed to make them available to the public. Yeah, but to see that, for one thing, that legislation was gutted. There were provisions in there that called for eminent domain, making any objects that are in the holdings of any of these defense contractors to turn them, that they become the property of the United States. All of that stuff's gone, and there's no guarantee that these organizations, they're not going to really be forced to do anything. I don't know what he's talking about here, because he says, and come June 2024, 180 days after the bill was passed in December and smack in the middle of election season, activists hope that a deluge of new UAP information will be disclosed. The new law requires that all UAP-related records created more than 25 years ago must be made public unless personally blocked by President Biden. There's really no teeth in this thing. We're not going to get the records. A lot of people in the UFO community already realize this. I mean, this bill really lacks a lot of teeth. I mean, for one thing, people in the UFO community understand, for the most part, that a lot of the records on this are not subject to Freedom of Information Act requests, and that they probably aren't even owned by the government at this point. They're probably in the vaults of these defense contractors that are part of the secret control group that are helping to cover this up, and we're not going to see any of those records. We're not going to get any. Nobody in the UFO community reasonably expects at this point that Biden's going to have access to potentially explosive information that would basically lead to disclosure this summer. That's not going to happen. In fact, I just talked about it on a podcast yesterday that this new Arrow report that's coming out is going to be bogus. We already know that in advance. I mean, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the former director, has been on his disinformation tour. He's given us a preview of the nonsense he's going to be spewing in that report. Then he gets into Danny Sheehan and some other stuff here. I'm not going to read this whole article. I just want to go to the pertinent parts of it where he talks about Jeremy Corbell. He says, Jeremy Corbell, he calls him a discredited UFO celebrity who has 225,900 followers on X and who claims to have played a major role in influencing members of Congress, has been escalating calls for violence. Corbell has tweeted, "This is a war, a UFO Vietnam," and that his followers should get mad, rage, and weaponize, and that he won't stop fighting for UFOs until the bodies hit the floor. Corbell adds menacingly that UFO debunkers should beware. This is all hyperbole from Corbell. Nobody in the UFO community thinks he's calling for violence. He's not calling for violence. This is all taken out of context. Nobody in the UFO community wants violence or is calling for violence. This is completely taken out of context in this. This guy doesn't seem to understand it, or he does understand it, but he used it deliberately. He's shaping and forming and misinforming people using these comments that Corbell made that was all hyperbole in the first place. And then he goes on to say, many of us have become numb to this kind of excitement coming from the far right, but the UAP issue enjoys broad popularity across the political spectrum, and one independent presidential candidate is taking notice, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Then he goes on to this. I'll leave the link for this article so you can check it out for yourself. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to read segments of it. He gets into all of this stuff about how with Kennedy and then Trump and that come June when Joe Biden when the deadline for these reports comes due that he's not going to have anything and it's going to make him look bad and he'll end up losing the election because of that. That's not. This is all nonsense. This is all a fever dream here. But it gets better. I want to talk. He gets the one thing he gets into here, which is absolutely insane. And I never even heard of this before. I don't think most people in the UFO community probably don't even know what he's talking about here. He has a section here called "Birthing the Noosphere" or Noosphere. I don't even know how to pronounce it. And he says, for my part, I should disclose that over the last 3 years, I've interviewed Danny Sheehan several times, twice at his office in Santa Cruz. Now 78 with a mop of curly gray hair perched atop a broad face with dark eyes, he is an affable, interesting conversationalist and a font of knowledge on many topics. His bio lists some of the most notable cases of the 20th century, the Pentagon Papers, the Karen Silkwood case, and an infamously unsuccessful case that attempted to unearth, via discovery, the roots of the Iran-Contra scandal. It doesn't say anything here, by the way, about Sheehan representing whistleblowers in here. It doesn't say anything about that at all. It doesn't even touch on that. Then he goes on to say, overlooking Danny's desk, placed high by a window, was a large black and white portrait of the French-American Catholic theologian Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard proposed that Jesus perhaps represented a more evolved version of man, and he, along with Russian scientist Vladimir Vernadsky and French mathematician Edouard Leroy, coined the idea of the noosphere, a point at which Earth and humanity would go through a phase change and evolve into something more enlightened, or Christic. This term, coined by Teilhard, so moved Sheehan he named his first advocacy group the Christic Institute. Sheehan would likely tell you that the aliens have come here to help humanity evolve and become more like Teilhard's notional space Jesus. Another person enamored with the noosphere is Vladimir Putin, though he prefers his compatriot Vernadsky's conception to Teilhard's. Vernadsky believed that our transition from the biosphere to the noosphere was likely to be violent and catastrophic. So let's listen to what we're talking about here. He's talking about that people like Danny Sheehan, because he believes in this noosphere and he believes in this. We're going to reach this point of enlightenment at some point in the future. That somehow it jibes with because Vladimir Putin believes in a version of this that involves violence and catastrophe. Then that means everybody in the UFO community is looking towards some violent, catastrophic event that's going to lead us to this enlightenment, which is complete. All of it, actually, to me, is completely insane. This has nothing to do with anything that's going on in Congress right now. Nothing. What's this guy looking at here? What's he talking about here? This is a completely insane conspiracy theory, what he's talking about here. I'm not going to get into the rest of it because it's complete, absolute nonsense. But then, of course, he The story then segs to Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. Of course, he's so understanding. So he's presented here so as a understanding guy here, so truthful and patriotic. You know, that's how it's presented here. It says Kirkpatrick, who recently resigned as the head of the Department of Defense's All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the latest such effort to aggregate and investigate UAP reports, penned a scathing Scientific American op-ed in January 2024, calling out the network of UFO activists. Arrow also compiled a report submitted to Congress and to be published sometime this year, actually by March 7th, as we know. According to Kirkpatrick, Arrow found no evidence of the existence of any alien life or a government cover-up. Now, this moron here, this investigative journalist, he's taking that for gospel, that Kirkpatrick he didn't find anything, so that's it, period. Well, what did he do? Did you ask Kirkpatrick what did he do? Right? What did he do? Did he just simply call up these places where whistleblowers had accused of housing alien craft, trying to reverse engineer these alien craft or stored alien bodies? Did he actually just call them up and ask them if that's true, and then hung up the phone when they told him it's not? I mean, what did he do? This guy's just taking Kirkpatrick his words for gospel. And the other thing about this, too, if you're an investigative journalist, and how could you call yourself that? I mean, any investigative journalist would if they're going to talk about this subject, they would study it. There's a lot to study here. It would take you a long time to figure this all out. But I could assure you, any investigative journalist who actually does real study here, right, they're going to come to the conclusion that not only are we being visited on Earth by some kind of non-human intelligence, whether it's from another planet or whether it's here or wherever, right? They're going to know that not only that is true, but they're also going to know that there is a government cover-up. There's just too much evidence to that effect. There's just too much. But anyway, it continues here. It says, in a follow-up interview with Scientific American, Kirkpatrick agreed with editor Daniel Vergano's characterization of Washington's latest obsession as a tremendous game of telegraph that's been going on for a long time. And it's spun up now from the world of ufology to entertainment to the Congress and genuine Congress people pounding the table and demanding answers. Then he goes on to talk about the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who warned about the dangers of overclassification and excessive government secrecy. Opportunists, foreign and domestic, are happy to amplify and take advantage of popular distrust in government. The United States should normalize its security protocols to ensure that information is not unnecessarily classified. Seeding public suspicion that government vaults contain dark secrets that, if revealed, would cause an ontological shock is a gift to our adversaries, and we should actively counter it. What are you talking about? What do you mean it's a gift to our adversaries? Do you think those people, what are you talking about here? I mean, they're saying that basically our adversaries, Russia and China, they're going to use this against us somehow. They're going to feed us. They're going to help feed this narrative too, this conspiracy narrative that somehow all these people, these morons that he's pretty much calling us in the UFO community, these violent militants or whatever he wants to say, this violent group of people, that's going to even make us more frenzied in the end. I mean, the words he uses here, he continues here. He says, the fact that a fringe group of activists, mirroring messaging from hostile foreign powers, has injected frivolous legislation rooted in myth into our most important defense bill is alarming. Okay, let me just stop there for a second. I'll tell you what's alarming is that there's dumbbells out there like this guy who doesn't do any kind of investigation that's worth that he should be doing, right? And then calls himself an investigative journalist. He's a poseur. Legislators need to practice better discernment and not be swayed by popular mythology, even as they themselves may have become susceptible to tempting questions planted by decades-long information warfare campaigns. Now, this guy's a complete dope. Just like Stephen Greenstreet is a complete dope. What they don't want to talk about here is the fact that people in Congress have been meeting in skiffs with these whistleblowers like David Grush and others. There was about 40 other ones. They have been meeting with some of these people in closed doors. They have learned some things. This bipartisan group of legislators would not be pushing for that kind of language in the National Defense Authorization Act bill if there weren't things there that had teeth. They know things that the public doesn't know right now, and they can't talk about it. This guy doesn't know this. Obviously he doesn't even talk. He doesn't even talk about the whistleblowers or the skiffs or David Grush at all. Then he continues here. He says, H.L. Mencken observed, democracy is the theory that the common people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard, but the people they elect should work to make systemic changes that diffuse suspicions over time rather than be guided by modern myth makers. Okay, that's great. Yeah, but the people they elect should work to make systemic changes that diffuse suspicions over time. That's what they're doing. That's what they're doing by trying to pass this legislation, rather than be guided by modern myth makers. No, it doesn't. People like Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon and Jeremy Corbell or whoever's trying to bend Congress's ear. That's not the full reason why they're doing this. They have seen things, and they've been meeting with these people in skiffs, been whistleblowers, people who know more stuff. David Grush talked about not only talking with these whistleblowers and getting information from them, but he's seen the documentation that corroborated what they were telling him. Does this guy know any of this? Then he goes on to say this. I love this part. He says the offices of Senators Kirsten Gillibrand, Mike Rounds, Marco Rubio, Chuck Schumer, and Mark Warner were contacted while researching this story, but they did not respond. Good they didn't respond. Why should they respond to this guy? I mean, what's he gonna? He's gonna call him up. He's like, yeah, you guys really don't believe in this nonsense from Jeremy Corbell and David Grush and Lou Elizondo, right? This UFO silliness, right? You're not falling for that. You're just, what are you doing? That's a stupid kind of question he's probably going to ask, because the guy's obviously a dumbbell, obviously. Yeah, what he's confusing with is he's confused between a frustration, which you see here on my podcast on a regular basis every week. You see frustration at this cover up, right? That's what he's confusing frustration, right, with violence, with potential violence. Nobody's calling for violence in the UFO community. Nobody's calling for. Jeremy Corbell wasn't calling for violence from the UFO. He's not. That was just hyperbole. He was just getting people worked up. But everybody in the people in the UFO community are smart, right? They don't want violence. They don't like it. I don't like what's going on in the world right now. I don't like the fact that there's people dying over in Israel, and I don't like the fact that there's people dying in Palestine or in Ukraine. I don't like it. I hate it. I hate violence. I hate war. Everybody in the UFO community hates it, right? And we actually some of us know that there is some sort of a presence here, a non-human intelligence among us, right? We know it because some of us had experiences like myself, right? And we know that they must look at us and look at these wild animals running around killing each other. We don't like it. We don't like it. So this guy, he's painted the UFO community as a bunch of violent morons. That's what he's trying to do. Actually, this guy's a dope. He's a moron. And here's another thing, right? This is called frustration. It's called frustration, and we're calling you out. If you see, here's the problem. They're taking this as being violent, right? We're not being violent. We're calling you dopes out who are sitting behind there with the blinders on and not looking at the evidence all the time. We're sick of it. We're sick of people like you with your big platforms putting out stupid articles like this, unresearched, and calling yourself an investigative journalist. Again, you're opposed. Yeah, that's what you are. It's called anger and frustration. There's no violence here. None. Anyway, moving on. Yeah. Need to move on here now. Enough of that. All I could say is this: is that people in the UFO community, they're good people, they're kind people, they're humble people, they're people who have for decades now. A lot of us have stood back and just took it, right? And when there's nothing we could do, there's no outlet. Now we're using the power of the internet to talk to people, to tell other people that, hey, there's something to this. There is a cover up, and we're tired of it. People have had encounters with non-human intelligent creatures. They've seen their craft up close. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get it out there. We're frustrated, but we're not violent. We're smart people. Actually, people in the UFO community, they're among the smartest people in this world. They're not afraid of any sort of repercussions that they might face for talking the truth, for blurting out their concerns. That's who the UFO community is. Anyway, moving on. I want to talk about. Now, I was talking in the previous podcast about that the Pentagon's preparing to offer a fifth explanation for the Roswell UFO crash. And I received some different comments from different people on Spotify. I received a comment from Kyle M. He says, "Did you see the university show that AI lie detecting to prove the witnesses of Roswell were telling the truth about bodies and UFO crash materials all proven correct?" Yes, I did, and I know what he's talking about there. I know I did talk about this show. There was a show. It was on the Discovery Channel, and that was back in I guess it was in 2022, and I did talk about that. I'm sure I did. It was called Roswell: The Final Verdict. I just wanted to point that out. What that show did, it took some archival clips of different witnesses to some of the events at Roswell involving some of the crash material, bodies, and whatnot. And when they had AI look at them, look at the video, and the AI for the most part determined that all these people were telling the truth. So that is something. I'll leave the link for people who haven't seen that so they could check that out. And also, I wanted to just point out, here's something else. Talking about debunkers, I talk about sometimes this Jason Colavito. He wrote today, I mean, this is how they are. This is how goofy these people are. He says here, you're talking about Tom DeLonge. Tom DeLonge had just published a book that was based on the Trinity crash that Jacques Vallée was talking about. So Jason Colavito puts a post on here about it. It says, DeLonge writes a novel based on Jacques Vallée's account of a hoax, and soon enough the novel will become secret proof that the hoax wasn't a hoax. Okay, for one thing, I didn't know that this was a hoax. There's been information presented. I haven't seen any debunker come up and state, with end-all evidence that showing that the Trinity crash that Vallée was talking about in his book about Trinity was a hoax. I never saw anything to that effect. I don't know what he's talking about. And so I actually wrote back to him. I said, I didn't know that the Trinity story was debunked as a hoax. Oh, I get it. You debunked it out of hand by conducting zero research from your armchair. What a great gig. Who do you have to trick to get a research by proclamation job? Yeah, that's what these people do. They basically do their research by proclamation. They don't provide all the data to stories, and then nobody knows the difference from the legacy media. But this guy, another debunker, getting away with it for years now, putting out lies about stuff, saying that there was a hoax. Hey, for all I know, it might be. But I've never seen any end-all evidence to show that this alleged 1945 Trinity crash, it was a crash that happened in New Mexico allegedly in 1945. I've never seen any evidence to show that this was a hoax. I haven't seen it. Where is it? I mean, I didn't see it. You think he would at least provided a link to it, but there is no link because he just made it up from his armchair. Anyway, getting back to this, before we move on, I wanted to talk about another comment I had received about this fifth explanation for Roswell. One of my followers here, let me put my glasses on. One of my YouTube followers, Commander Cronus, said, my interest in the Roswell story was destroyed not by the government, but by simply studying the actual media reports from the time. You have zero reports of bodies, but do have reports of people finding aluminum foil, sticks, rubber strings, stuff like that. I don't know if that was a mogul balloon or not, but it doesn't seem like a spaceship. So what he was saying here, Commander Cronus, is saying that there was all the reports in the newspapers back then didn't have anything in there about alien bodies or spaceships, right, or flying saucers. But it did have stuff in there about aluminum foil, sticks, and rubber, and blah blah blah. Yeah, but that's because it was covered up. I responded to him. I said there was nothing in any newspaper because it was covered up. The newspapers weren't giving any information. Right, so nobody knew about it. I mean, the only people who knew about it were the people who were told to shut up, or they were threatened, their lives were threatened. There was a lot of people who testified to that, a lot of civilians, and then there was a lot of people in the military who were told to shut up, and they didn't talk about it for years, like Jesse Marcel Sr., for instance, and among other people. And then it went to like a back and forth between me and Commander Cronus on this. Like, he's unconvinced about the Roswell case. And then he brought up Walter Haut. He says, I can't say for sure if he's talking about the Walter Haut affidavit. Actually, as some of you know out there, Walter Haut was the communications director for the Roswell Army Air Force in Roswell at that time. And he was ordered to send out this press release that they recovered a flying disc. And then a few years before Haut died, he signed an affidavit stating that, he actually did see remnants of the craft, the crash, and that he did see the alien bodies, right? And that he knew that they were extraterrestrial, and that they weren't allowed to talk about it. That's basically what he said in his affidavit. And Commander Cronus says, I can't say for sure if the affidavit is true or not, but if it's true, then why didn't Walter Haut mention this before? In the 1990s, the Air Force officially released any and all military personnel from secrecy oaths or non-disclosure agreements they might have signed pertaining to the Roswell incident. Well, this was all outlined in books like this, Witness to Roswell, by Thomas Carey and Donald Schmidt. And I actually wrote back to him. It says he mentioned some things in life, but he had promised Colonel Blanchard that he would never say anything while he was alive. That's why he waited until he was dead. So he apparently, according to his family, to Haut's family and other people, the researchers, Haut did not want to say anything because he had sworn to this Colonel Blanchard that he would never say anything publicly about the bodies or the wreckage. And he only touched on it here and there in life, but then he signed this affidavit several years before he died, and then that's how we know that's how that went down. And actually, one of my other followers, Tony Barnes, actually expounded on this, and I just want to read his comment here. He says, that's exactly how I understand the situation. Haut and Blanchard were good friends, and Haut swore to keep the secret as long as he lived. When he got older, his daughter, Julie Schuster, and Don Schmidt, plus Thomas Carey, convinced him to prepare an affidavit exposing the truth to be released upon his demise. And here was a direct quote. Don and I, Julie Schuster, talked to my dad, and we said, do you want to do a written statement for release after your death? And he agreed to it. Schuster continues, we were very careful. My dad was very particular. So he and I went over it word by word, sentence by sentence, just to make sure there was no question about what was written. And that's a direct quote from Julie Schuster. That was Haut's daughter. No coercion, as far as I know, occurred regarding this affidavit that I've ever read about. Yeah, there's been illusions put out there by people in the debunker world. Yeah, he must have been coerced to go sign that. He was probably out of his mind. He was late in life, so they had him sign that because he was senile at the time. That's what they try to make you believe. It's always some stupid excuse where by the debunker crowd to make something to paint something as deceitful. Anyway, continuing here, it says, Walter, what Haut's affidavit revealed was not only was his initial press release about a recovered flying disc accurate, but that there were 2 crash sites at Roswell, and he himself had witnessed firsthand what had fallen from the sky that fateful night in 1947. Basically, Dad said, yes, we did see the bodies. Yes, he did see the craft, and much more than that, said Schuster. At one point, I asked him about the size, and he said the craft was about 25 feet in diameter. The ship, which he described, was about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, more of an egg-shaped object, and he did see a number of bodies, says Carey. He described them as being the size of children, and when asked point blank if what he believed it was that he had seen, without hesitation, he'd say it was not from this earth, it was something manufactured off this earth. And it also says here, Carey and Schmidt found dozens of other witnesses for their book, each one verifying Haut's claims. There's a whole lot more, of course. I 100%, this is a comment directly from Tony Barnes. There's a whole lot more, of course. I 100% believe Walter Haut was telling the absolute truth. He'd kept the secret faithfully as he'd sworn to his entire life. Why would a man of his caliber change his story unless he felt the truth needed to be told? My belief, as I stated previously, is that Walter Haut's affidavit is absolutely true. Others may believe differently. I have no issues with that. Yeah, and I just want to point out, I mean, I talk about Roswell on here all the time, but I always also say that people, if you want to understand Roswell, you're not going to get it from any documentary. You're not going to get it from even a collection of podcasts. It's too detailed. There's too much to it. You become convinced by what happened there, but when you read the books that people have put together, a lot of research went into these books. Like I talk about all the time. I have them right here. Roswell, The Ultimate Cold Case Closed, Witness to Roswell. Both of these were by Thomas Carey and Donald Schmidt. There's another book I have here, The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell. That was written by Kevin Randall and Donald Schmidt. There's a ton of different books, and you go through them and you see all the witnesses. You know, there's more witnesses than the main witnesses that are usually talked about on these documentaries are usually Jesse Marcel Jr., Jesse Marcel Sr., Walter Haut, among others. Right? There's a Glenn Dennis, the mortician. There's a lot of different witnesses you see on TV all the time, but there's a lot more beyond that you don't even, the documentary won't even talk about because there's just too much. And there's other details too that an hour long or a 2 hour long documentary could get into. There's just so much to it. And when you read all the information and you see all the testimony from all the different people, you realize there's no question this happened. There's just no question. I'm just going to give you a couple of other for instances that I picked out in this Witness to Roswell. Here's one. Sergeant Homer Rowlett Jr. That's a name you don't usually hear of much. He was a member of the 60. This is from Witness to Roswell, by the way. He was a member of the 603rd Air Engineering Squadron at the Roswell Army Airfield in 1947. He was career military and retired as an NCO after 26 years of dedicated service to his country. Before passing away in March of 1988, he finally conveyed to his son Larry the following startling information about his involvement with the crash of the flying saucer. His father was part of a cleanup detail sent to the impact site north of Roswell. Larry was told that his father had seen everything. He had handled the memory material, which according to Homer was thin foil that kept its shape. If that wasn't enough, he described the actual ship, which was somewhat circular, but what followed caught his son completely by surprise. I saw 3 little people. They had large heads, and at least one was alive. His father ended by adding that there were 3 sites, the one just north of Roswell and the 2 others near Corona. Basically there were apparently 3 sites. The craft apparently exploded over the Brazel, the ranch where Brazel was working, called the Foster Ranch, which was about 175 miles northwest of Roswell. And then there was 2 other sites where some debris came down, and the second site there was some more debris, and then the final impact site of the main piece was just north of Roswell, about 45 miles north of Roswell. That's where most of the bodies were found apparently, and the bigger piece of the craft, the pod that they called it. But anyway, so this guy's saying, I saw 3 little people. They had large heads, and at least one was alive. His father ended by adding that there were 3 sites, one just north of Roswell, and the others near Corona. And then it says here, according to Larry's sister, Carlene Green, my father was a very honest, honorable, and trustworthy man. He never lied to me. Her father had never mentioned his tenure at Roswell to her until just 2 weeks before he died. Homer was only given days to live. Carlene, who at the time knew nothing about the story her dad had secretly passed on to her brother, was nervously waiting with her father as he lay on a gurney in the hospital, about to be wheeled into the operating room. Still totally lucid, he painfully motioned for her to come close so he could speak, in case he didn't have another chance, which was clearly the impression his daughter had at the time. She had no idea he would confess the following. I was at Roswell when they recovered the spaceship in 1947. I was involved. I saw it. It's all true. Homer told Carlene that he was sorry for never saying anything before, but he was told to keep quiet or else. And there was a lot of cases like this, a lot of deathbed confessions from a lot of people who were in Roswell. Right before they died, they told family members about what they remembered, what they experienced at Roswell. This guy said he saw bodies, and this corroborates what other witnesses just like him had said. I mean, there was this other guy here, Melvin Brown. You probably saw this guy on TV a lot. In 1986, as Brown was on his deathbed, you probably heard about this guy in a lot of documentaries because he is featured there. And he said he saw it too. He saw it was approaching dusk when one other soldier and I were stationed in one of the ambulance trucks at the recovery site. Everything was being loaded onto trucks, and I couldn't understand why some of the trucks had ice or something in them. I did not understand what they wanted to keep cold. Our orders were not to look under the canvas tarp in the back. The moment we had a chance, I pulled back the covering. There were bodies, small bodies, and they had big heads and slanted eyes. There was another guy. And also, according to Brown, and among other witnesses, a lot of these soldiers who were, part of this cleanup, right? They were actually given as an incentive. I mean, as a part of as a carrot. In addition to the stick saying, "Don't ever talk about this," they were also given a carrot, and that carrot was $10,000. Melvin Brown said he received $10,000 from this. And here's one more. I'll just give you one more. This is probably one you never heard of. A lot of people, some people have, but I'm sure some of you out there have not heard. Myers Wani was a full-blooded Comanche Indian who had piloted B-24 Liberator bombers during World War II. Wani was a top-tier security officer by 1947. In July of that year, Captain Wani was ordered from Fort Simmons in Colorado to Roswell Field in New Mexico to oversee the transport of a top secret item from Roswell to Fort Worth via a special B-29 flight. The item in question was a single large wooden crate that Wani was to accompany in the bomb bay for the duration of the flight to Fort Worth. Apparently motivated by a featured segment about the Roswell incident in 1980 on the popular TV show In Search Of, Wani finally broke his silence on the matter with his family during the final year of his life. According to his daughter Blanche in a 2005 telephone interview with our investigation, this is what her father said to her. 1, the Roswell incident was true. 2, he had flown with the alien bodies from Roswell to Fort Worth. And 3, there were 3 sites. So that's that. See, when you start, this is the issue. When you dig into the Roswell story and you compare what the witnesses to this, all these witnesses to this, tell you, right, compared to what the Air Force has been trying to push on us all these years, anthropomorphic dummies that were dropped in 1957, an explosion, an aircraft. People got confused with the crash of a Air Force cargo or carrier plane or whatever in 1956, where all these guys were killed, and they try to confuse people, and they don't. But here's the thing: they don't talk about all of these eyewitness reports, and a lot of them were deathbed confessions. And when you put it all together, it tells you that something happened in Roswell and had nothing to do with a balloon. And here's one other thing to keep in mind. The site the site at the debris field on the Foster Ranch, like according to Jesse Marcel Sr., I mean, it was a wide area, and the whole thing was just strewn with all this wreckage. And it took them a good part of the day just to collect a lot of these pieces and put them in the back of this Jeep that they had. And there was still a lot of stuff there. I mean, he just took back some samples, right? And so, but he also talked about, there was parts of the ground that were gouged out, like something came down and then bounced back up again. There was big gouges in the ground. A balloon train doesn't cause things like that. So that's another thing to keep in mind. The evidence is overwhelming in favor of the extraterrestrial craft crashing. That's the bottom line. You do the research, you read these books, you put it all together. Read the Air Force books, and you know what? There are books out there that were written by debunkers about Roswell. You read those, and you can see how they deliberately keep information out that doesn't support their hypothesis that they try to put forth. Right? You see the difference. You can see how they're lying when you put it all together, right? You can only come to one conclusion: there's a cover-up, and they're about to lie to us again. They're about to tell us give us a rehashing of the Roswell crash that in this new Arrow report. We've heard it from Kirkpatrick. It's going to be filled with lies. It's going to be the same old, same old. They're going to talk about polyethylene balloons that weren't even in use in 1947. They're going to talk about stuff like that. I can tell you, and I could be wrong, but whatever the case, right? They're going to lie. They're not going to tell the truth about it. It's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. And, and I just also want to point out one other thing here. I was recently talking about this Brian Bender. He's another debunker, making stupid statements. And he made recently, and he said something to the effect of that, where's the proof at? These whistleblowers are talking about, but they never have any evidence. They don't stop to think about what the situation is here. The evidence is in highly secure facilities where there are armed people standing around. And if you try to steal something from it, they're going to shoot you. That's why the whistleblowers just can't come up with any evidence, right, like that. I mean, how could they? They'll get shot. That's what's going on here. These people, they just don't think it through. They just don't think it through. They just throw it all away. They just take whatever the Pentagon tells them as truth, and just, these other people are crazy and weirdos. And now we have this other guy here trying to lump us in with QAnon and extremists, violent extremists, and it's just nonsense. It's just nonsense. They're really trying to make the UFO community look really bad. And now it's another step here today, what we talked about earlier with this clown making us look like we're a bunch of violent, empty-headed, stupid goofballs, when it's actually these people, them themselves, this guy, that poser, pretending to be an investigative reporter, not doing his homework, and then writing garbage like that and putting it out there for the world to absorb. Anyway, I want to just say thank you all for joining me. Until next time.